Your Excellency, the President of the United Nations General Assembly, the Honorable Sam Kutesa, Your Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the ministers who are here, Your Excellencies, heads of regional and sub-regional organizations, ladies and gentlemen. This year, when the United Nations was created, many of our countries did not exist as independent countries. In Africa, it was only Ethiopia and Liberia that were sovereign countries on the continent. While there have been some modest reforms in the UN since its creation in 1945, most of the fundamental structures that were created after the Second World War by the victorious powers, such as the powers conferred upon the permanent 5 countries in the Security Council, remain unchanged. Chapter 8 of the Charter of the United Nations provides for cooperation between the United Nations and regional organizations. Despite this, it reserves the right for the UN Security Council to authorize enforcement action. However, the crucial decisions of international peace and security within the Security Council are mostly taken by the veto-wielding members. This is a big mistake and has already caused a lot of harm to Africa, like in the case of Libya, where Africa's opinion was ignored. Hence, the present massive human hemorrhage in that area. If the Security Council members that took military action in Libya had listened to the voice of Africa, the present chaos in Libya, Mali, the people who are dying in the Mediterranean Sea from the African shores trying to get to Europe could have been avoided. In fact, Gaddafi's Libya used to employ many workers from Africa. In any case, it was very presumptuous for the 5 permanent members to claim that they are responsible for global security. Out of the global human population, that is now 7 billion people, the 5 permanent members represent only about 1.9 billion people. How and why should they monopolize responsibility, in quotes, for global security? This is a structural deficiency in the architecture of global security. Some crisis situations are such that an immediate and robust response is required. This can best be done by countries in the region. Such a situation occurred in December 2013 in South Sudan. If we in the region had not acted when we did quickly, the region could possibly have had another genocide. The neighboring countries could have stopped the genocide of Rwanda in 1994. We could not do it because the UN was obstructing us. To talk about strengthening cooperation between the United Nations and the regional and sub-regional organizations, one has got to start by re-examining the structures of the whole United Nations itself and change some of the old-fashioned ones to conform with the current realities. Uganda strongly believes that for genuine cooperation to occur between the United Nations and the regional and sub-regional organizations, reform of the United Nations in general, Security Council in particular, is imperative. This is in the long run what will help us collectively to prevent the use of the United Nations for national or group interests of the powerful members to undermine the efforts of the regional organizations and of peace in the world. In the meantime, and as we strive to reform the United Nations into a modern and relevant organization that serves all its members based on sovereign equality as embedded in its charter, the starting point for cooperation is that we need to reaffirm the principle of complementarity envisaged in Chapter 8 of the Charter as the basis for building and strengthening cooperation between the United Nations and regional and sub-regional organizations. The United Nations should therefore respect processes that are undertaken by the regional organizations, especially in areas of conflict resolution. While we abhor impunity, the United Nations approach that usually, superficially and without proper contextualization, emphasizes justice in instances of conflict resolution at the expense of long-term peace is manifestly self-defeating. In this regard, the United Nations should not just blindly pursue the option of placing sanctions on individuals or referring them to the ICC without holding consultations with the regions affected, as this often undermines the very process of resolving the conflict in question. On the other hand, where the United Nations has worked in consonance with regional or sub-regional organizations, there have been tangible positive results, as is the case in Somalia and in Burundi. Many of the conflicts are results of distortions and mistakes of long duration, endogenously and exogenously authored and perpetuated. Therefore, last-minute, high-handed interventions without a thorough understanding of the dynamics of the situation are wrong and injurious to the hapless populations of the concerned areas. Secondly, we need to harmonize our understanding of what complementarity entails. This, in our opinion, means the recognition that both the United Nations and regional organizations have various strengths and weaknesses, and hence they need to complement rather than supplement each other's roles in areas of conflict prevention, mediation, resolution, peacekeeping, and peace enforcement. Thirdly, from Uganda's and indeed Africa's perspective, complementarity also entails sharing the burden of maintaining international peace and security, consultative decision-making, and respect for regional processes, as well as the division of labor based on comparative advantage. Mr. President, many on the African continent and elsewhere have come round to agreeing with what Uganda and other African patriots have been advocating for a long time. African solutions for African problems. The international community, including the United Nations, can only support and should therefore respect regional processes. You are all aware of the long period it takes the United Nations to deploy in a crisis situation. The process from initial consultations to, in quotes, a zero draft resolution, through several rounds of negotiations on actual drafts to a final resolution authorizing any form of action, can take agonizingly long to come through. That is, if one or more of the permanent members with veto powers does not use it to block the process. Some crisis situations are such that an immediate and robust response is required. This can best be done by countries in the region. Such a situation occurred in December 2013 in South Sudan. If we in the region had not acted when we did quickly, the region could possibly have had another genocide. The neighboring countries could have stopped the genocide of Rwanda in 1994. We could not do it because the UN was obstructing us. Uganda, therefore, strongly supports the establishment of the African Capacity for Immediate Response to Crises, ACRIC, which is an African-owned initiative for rapid military intervention as and when the need arises to quickly respond to crisis situations on the African continent. We believe support to this mechanism will strengthen the international community's resolve to deal with crises that threaten international and regional peace and security. In situations where actual deployment by the UN has been taken, as in the Eastern DRC, the mandate of the mission is often so restricted that you end up with a sitting duck mission with the troops in a peacekeeping role with no peace to keep. What we need in Africa is support for the international community, is support from the international community in terms of funding and equipment so that we can do the job ourselves. It is true that due to the phenomenon of colonialism and neo-colonialism in Africa, many of our countries still face challenges of ensuring peace for their nationals because they do not build capacity. Therefore, in cases where the national army and security forces fail to guarantee peace, the region can step in and only be supported by the international community, including the United Nations. I refer to this arrangement as the Trinity. We, the Christians, believe in what we call Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So we should have a Trinity in maintaining peace in the world. And the Trinity in this case, this is not God's Trinity, but man's Trinity. That is to say, the internal stakeholders, that is the number one, the region, number two, and the international community, number three. Where this has been done, where this has happened, as in DRC, with the internationally supported intervention brigade from contiguous African states, the results have been positive to some extent. Support for an African rapid response force would go a long way in strengthening cooperation between the UN, regional, and sub-regional organizations. Mr. President, I have already referred to the support to the regions by the United Nations. The major challenge in addressing regional and sub-regional issues, whether in peace and security, humanitarian response, or regional integration and economic development, is inadequate resources. Most of the African countries have instituted reforms which have seen the region as a whole registering some of the fastest economic growth rates. However, in the long run, we shall need partnership with the international community, including the United Nations, to develop our own capacities. To demonstrate our resolve to address these challenges, Uganda strongly supports the African Union's commitment to increase the proportion of the cost of African Union peace operations covered by its member states. This is in addition to contributing about 45% of the UN's uniformed peacekeepers. On the other hand, since the United Nations had the duty to support regional organizations, as provided for in the Charter, Uganda supports the use of UN-assessed contributions to support regional-led peace operations based on the fact that the United Nations Security Council retains the primacy for the maintenance of international peace and security. This is because Uganda believes that the use of funding mechanisms like trust funds, while helpful in the short run, are unreliable and unpredictable since they are based on voluntary contributions. We also believe that strengthening cooperation between the United Nations and regional and sub-regional organizations will greatly benefit the implementation of post-2015 development agenda. On account of the leverage they have with their respective constituency member countries, regional and sub-regional organizations provide useful fora for policy coordination and harmonization on various ongoing important multilateral processes, including the post-2015 development agenda, climate change, the WTO Doha round, among others. They are also central in coordinating the implementation of the outcomes from these multilateral processes at their appropriate levels. Regional and sub-regional organizations are the center of promoting cooperation and integration in areas such as trade and investment, infrastructure development, critical sectors including agriculture, energy, water, security, etc., as well as fostering private sector partnerships. I cannot end my comments without making two final points. One point is the question of ideological disorientation. This entails the misdiagnosis of social, political, and economic issues and acting on the basis of the misdiagnosis, especially with the use of force, regular or irregular. In the past, that ideological disorientation manifested itself in the form of imperialism and colonialism. They caused so much damage to societies and peoples. The colonized peoples rose up and, after great sacrifices, defeated the overt aspects of imperialism and colonialism. Today, one of the forms of ideological disorientation is sectarianism of religion, tribe, or even clans in some cases, and chauvinism of gender and sometimes of race. This ideology of sectarianism and chauvinism is a pseudo-ideology that tries to promote the issue of identity in such a manner that it eclipses the very people's legitimate interests of economic exchange, interaction, and shared prosperity. Most of the time, they even misdefine identity on opportunistic and irrational basis, where the actors wish to remain big fishes in small ponds, as one of our leaders once said. Many of the conflicts in the world are authored, promoted, and fueled by this ideological disorientation. We cannot only deal with consequences, but not look at the causes. Some parts of the international community have been able to blacklist what they call anti-Semitism. Why can't something be done about sectarianism and chauvinism? How can we hobnob with sectarianism and chauvinists and then talk about global peace when these pseudo-ideologies are the causes of the very conflicts we are talking about? The second point is the discipline and indeed orientation of the international forces, the regional forces, or the local forces the UN system uses or relies on to keep or enforce peace. Uganda had become a failed state in the 1970s, 1980s. We were only able to rescue it by assaulting ideological disorientation mentioned above and dealing most harshly with indisciplined soldiers that loot people's property, rape and defile women, take sex slaves, or commit homicide. If the United Nations system, the regional forces, or those acting under us are not able to handle the question of discipline, we shall become part of the problem, not part of the solution. I thank you.